What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Tea with Carly. I am your host, Carly, aka Teacher Carly, and I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, but I am so excited about today's podcast. Not because all the other podcasts are bad, but this is probably the most exciting one I've done yet, and that's because it's about storytelling and the art of storytelling, how to share your story or stories in English. And if you are a student in the academy and you know me, you know that storytelling is my thing. Almost every example I give is linked to some kind of personal story. I also teach a class in the Speak English with Tiffany Academy that's literally called Storytelling Class, because it's such an important thing to know when you're learning a new language. It's important to learn how to express yourself. And a lot of times as humans, we express ourselves through storytelling. So it's a powerful, powerful, powerful communication tool in both personal and professional context. You know, it's good to know how to tell stories. So I'm excited for today's class. I'm going to try to introduce you to the key elements of a good story. You know, we have to learn the key elements, the kind of boring stuff before I can get into the good stuff. So I'm going to teach you a little bit about that. I'm going to teach you some phrases, and it's going to be a good time. It's going to be fun. So first off, I just want to let you know why telling a story or storytelling is so important. All right. And I know I kind of touched on that a couple seconds ago, but I just want to get right into it because I feel like I'm going to talk forever in this podcast if I don't actually get to the points first. So I want to explain to you how storytelling is literally like an ancient tradition. All right. It connects people, it conveys emotion, information, it teaches lessons. In literally every culture, there's something about storytelling. Every culture has some kind of connection to storytelling. And that's for as far back as we can remember, and as far back as history dates, storytelling has always been so important in different cultures. Sometimes it's how they teach, sometimes it lets you know information. It conveys emotion. Sometimes it's art, So the role of storytelling when it comes to personal and professional context is, extremely important. You have to know how to tell a story, just to even communicate, just to have fun. Like, I tell stories every day and I'm like, oh, remember that one time? And then I tell a story, or, oh yeah, that reminds me. And then I tell a story, So stories help us connect with others and explain complex ideas, like I mentioned, and just, engage with people, All in all, storytelling is just essential for building relationships, both in social settings and in the workplace and even outside. Job interviews, presentations, casual conversations. Storytelling is essential for building relationships like that. So now that we understand how important storytelling is, I want to now talk about how we can structure a good story. So this, again, is a little bit of the boring side, but it's super important. It's things that, as a native English speaker, we learn this kind of thing in middle school and high school in our English classes. And so it's something that has to be said, even though it's not so fun to talk about, but you have to structure a good story. Now, I'm not telling you that every time you tell a story, it has to be like this. This is just like a guideline, So I want to talk about how storytelling can make messages more memorable and impactful for both the speaker and the listener, and I want to try to give some examples of effective stories that have made an impact in various settings. So like, an example, I'll just go ahead and give the examples right now. So a lot of times when we are watching TV and there's, politics or something going on, some kind of drama, the politicians or whoever is speaking on TV, whoever's trying to give a speech, sometimes they try to tell a story to kind of relate to either the consumer or relate to the people that they're speaking to, the citizens. They try to tell a story to kind of be like, okay, listen, we're not that different. I mean, sometimes it's like, yeah, we are. You are rich, I am poor. Or it's like you have like a super high position of authority and I do not. We're different. But they try to tell a story to to let other people know, like, hey, I'm human just like you are, you know? Then there's things like marketing campaigns. I've seen so many advertisements, especially here recently, where it's like a story. And that's kind of always been, you know, I don't know, as far as I can remember. I don't know about before I was born, but a lot of times advertisements try to tell like a short little story in their advertisement. You know, I remember growing up, it would be like a commercial for a vacuum cleaner, but the storyline is, oh, it's this mom who's maybe she's a single mom and she's really stressed out and her kids keep on getting crumbs all over the floor and she doesn't know what to do because she's like, you know, she's working so hard to keep her house clean, but then the kids come and, you know, when I was a kid, I was like, oh, this is a stupid commercial. But now as an adult, I totally understand. And then it comes through and the vacuum cleaner just like cleans everything up, right? That whole advertisement was a strategic marketing campaign for this vacuum cleaner, all right? It told a story. And then also, like, just when you're chilling with your friends or your family, it's good to just kick back and be able to know how to tell a story, you know, whether it's fictional or non-fictional, whether it's about your life or about somebody you know, it's good just to be able to tell a story. So when you are thinking of structuring a story, we have the beginning, the middle, the climax, and the end. Now, these are also called the introduction, rising action, turning point, and conclusion. If you want to be super technical, maybe you guys don't know this, but when I was in college, I had to take quite a few storytelling classes. And even I had a class that was literally called fairy tales or fictional, something along those lines. Now I forgot the name of it, but it was like a storytelling class. And you know, everybody knows, oh, you have the beginning of a story, the middle, the climax, which is like the peak, and then the end. But there's other words that we use if you want to be technical, if you are an English major, as I was, and if you have an English background, as I do. It's called the introduction, which is the beginning, the rising action, which is the middle, the climax, which is the turning point or the suspenseful part, and then the conclusion, which is the end. So in a good story, you have in the beginning, you have the opening of the story where you kind of set the stage, you introduce the characters, you explain the setting, you know. You start off with like, once upon a time in a small village far, far away, you know. And then you have the rising action or the middle part where this part kind of takes it to a different level. The story develops, conflicts arise, things get more interesting. You know, this is where maybe tension builds up. This is where it leads you into that climax or that turning point. And then, of course, you hit that climax, you hit that turning point. And this is the point of the story where the main conflict reaches its peak. All right. It's often like the most exciting part of the story, the most emotional part of the story. It's where everything is like, oh my goodness, this is the reason why you're telling me the story. Or, you know, for example, if you're watching a movie, it's like the part of the movie where it's like, aha, I totally understand what's going on now. That's the climax or turning point. And then it kind of comes down. If you think of it like a mountain, you know, you have the climax of a mountain, you have like the very top, the peak of the mountain. So you're climbing up. The beginning, the middle is like where you're climbing up on top of the mountain. And then you reach the peak and then you have to go back down. And the ending and the conclusion is kind of the resolution or the problem gets solved, the resolution of the conflict or how the conflict is resolved or what happens after. You know, it's kind of closes out the story. It explains how things kind of settle down and return back to like normal life and how the characters or whoever you're talking about kind of resolved all the issues. So if you're climbing up the mountain, for the climax or for the beginning, the middle, you reach the top of the mountain, which is the climax, and then at the end of the conclusion is like you going back down the mountain for all my visual people out there. So just for example, really quick, you have the famous children's story, you know, Little Red Riding Hood. That's a good structured story, you know? So now that you know the key elements of a good story, I really want to just encourage you guys. I want you guys to know that It's hard. It's hard to express your emotions in another language, and I think you guys already know that. But it's not impossible. The feelings and the emotions during each part of the story can be expressed. For example, you can use descriptive language when you talk about the setting. So you can say, instead of just saying once upon a time in a small village, you can say once upon a time, long ago, in a small village far, far away, there was tall trees, green grass, yellow flowers, and a small child running through the field. You can use very descriptive language where it kind of paints a picture in your head. And then also you can, make your characters even more emotional, by adding emotion to the characters. And then that in turn, that kind of helps engage your listeners, because that you're a good storyteller when you're not even really focused on the words or the vocabulary coming out of somebody's mouth, because there's like a little mini movie playing in your head. You don't even have to really listen to the words. It's like the person telling the story is so good at storytelling that in your mind, you can see everything. You can picture everything. It's like a little movie. That's the only way I can kind of explain it, like a little movie playing in your head. So I hope you guys take these key elements that you've learned and incorporate them into your everyday vocabulary. Not saying that you have to use the word turning point, rising action, introduction every day, but when you're telling a story, I want you to kind of think back on this and be like, all right, I can't just jump straight ahead to the climax. I have to kind of build it up. Now, I'm not going to lie, when I tell a story, I sometimes give too many details that are kind of irrelevant, but I'm a female, all right? I am a woman, and that's just what we do. And you know what? Sometimes they become relevant. So just let me do whatever I want to do, all right? My husband says that whenever I tell a story, instead of just getting straight to the point, I walk for like a mile around the point and then I get to the point. Yeah, I kind of get that. But at the same time, it's a good story. You're having a good time because I'm a storyteller that paints the picture or has the movie playing in your little mind. So I feel like it's fine. All right. So before we move on and I actually get into a story, because I do want to tell you guys a story today, I want to go over one last thing, and that is how important phrases and vocabulary can be when you're telling a story. So when you think of storytelling, a lot of people automatically assume it's like fairy tales, and that's true. Fairy tales are a huge part of telling stories, and literature has made storytelling so important, but also has made storytelling, like the word storytelling, because the word storytelling is often directly associated to literature. Sometimes it can be confusing whenever we talk about telling stories. People are like, oh, well, you sit around a campfire and you tell this fairy tale story that never really happened. It's just like you're making it up as you go. And that's a story. And that's literally storytelling. And that's an art. But there's also just the everyday storytelling too, where you're literally like recalling what happened. I was just telling some of my students a couple days ago, I was at the gym. I was working out. All right. The machine that I was working out on is right next to a window. It was the middle of the day. I look out the window and I kid you not, there is a raccoon walking across the parking lot. Now, this is like out of the ordinary for me because the area that my gym is located, there's not a lot of wildlife. Even the area that I live right now, it's kind of a suburb, but also metro area at the same time. There's not wildlife really. Here and there are, but definitely not a raccoon in the middle of the day. So, that's also a weird thing. Raccoons are usually nocturnal. So I was like, okay, why is there a raccoon? And then also it was like a parking lot that was super busy. It was like on a Saturday. And I'm like, okay, that's really weird. So I took a video of it because, I'm just like, that's hilarious. But yeah, I was telling the story about it, how it was just like an odd encounter. And that too is a story. Me recalling a past experience is a story. You're still storytelling. But, like I mentioned, because of literature, and I love literature, I love actual like fairy tales. I even took a class in college called The Brothers Grimm, which if you guys don't know, The Brothers Grimm, literally like the masterminds behind most fairy tales, even the ones like Disney has used. Disney made it more kid friendly. The Brothers Grimm are a little bit grim and dark, but I took a whole class on that in college. So I know, usually when you tell a story, it's once upon a time or a long time ago or it all started when, like those kind of phrases. And that's good if you're telling a story where it's like a fairy tale or something that you are kind of coming up off the top of your head. Also, building the story is, and then, or next, or suddenly, or out of nowhere, meanwhile, before I even knew it. That's how you build up a story. So these are some vocabulary and phrases that are good to keep in your mind whenever you are storytelling. However, I will preface by saying some of these are kind of cliche. It's ones that you would use like for like fairy tales, ones that you would use like to tell a story to like a little kid. But when you're telling your everyday story, you can just be like, yeah, so it all started when Sarah messaged David and David got upset because she said this, blah, 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 and you want to spill the tea a little bit. You can use it. You can use different phrases like that. So then during your climax, though, you can use phrases like the turning point came when ... or it was at this moment that she knew blah, 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 or and then everything changed when ... Those are some of the phrases you can use for the climax. And then finally you have the conclusion, and you can say finally. You can use transition words. So like finally, obviously, in the end, eventually, as a result, or even for fairy tales and stuff, you can just say, and they lived happily ever after, But I said all that. You're probably like, Carly, why are you rambling on and on about different phrases and vocabulary? Because sometimes I know I've heard it time and time again from my students. When you want to express yourself in another language, and especially if you want to tell a story, you want to be engaging, you don't know where to start. And then you don't know how to transition whenever you do start. So I wanted to go over that, and maybe I'll even put them in the comments below so you guys have it. I wanted to go over that there are ways that you can start a story. I'm not saying that you have to stick to these because, in all honesty, it's not supernatural, it's not super native, but they will get you going. And they're more like on the fairy tale end of storytelling, not necessarily the everyday life of storytelling. But these phrases and vocabulary that I just went over, I think it will help you be able to take the initiative to tell stories more, because some people are like, oh, I have this really cool story that I want to tell that happened to me last week, but I don't know how to begin, and I don't know how to like explain it or transition from one thing or to another. And now you do, because I gave you some phrases that will help with that. So I know I sounded like I was rambling for a little bit, but there was a method behind my madness, guys. All right. And before we move on and I go ahead and tell you a story, the last thing I want to talk about is how important descriptive vocabulary, especially adjectives, are to stories. Super important, because those adjectives or those descriptive vocabulary words literally bring the stories to life. So instead of just saying it was nighttime, you can say it was a cold, dark, stormy night. Boom. Automatically paints the picture in your head, right? When I said it was nighttime, the only thing in my head was like the night sky. But now we know that it was cold, it was dark, it was stormy, and it was night. Totally different picture painted in my head, right? If I say she was scared, okay, I picture in my head like a little girl that's scared. But if I say she felt extremely terrified, then it's a little bit different. Like her facial expression changes, like in my head, the little video playing in my head, Or if I say it was crowded, all right, I just picture like a sea of people. But if I say the streets were extremely crowded with people, or the streets were extremely crowded with families, even more descriptive, not just people, but now I'm picturing, people of all ages. It gets a little bit more descriptive, right? So I encourage you to practice describing using descriptive vocabulary, because it can really change the story and how people listen to your story too. Because to be honest, if you don't use any descriptive vocabulary, your story, it's hard to listen, because it seems like I can't play that little movie in my head. I can't understand what you're saying easily because even though you're speaking English perfectly, maybe it's kind of boring. You want to use descriptive words. If I just say, like the examples I just said, if I put that all together and I'm like, it was night time, she was scared, and the streets were crowded. All right, that's cool. But if I say it was a cold, dark, rainy night, she felt extremely terrified, even though the streets were overly crowded with people of all shapes and sizes, all ages and nationalities. Now it's like, ooh, where is she? Why are they out? Why are they out in the street when it's cold, dark, and rainy? What's going on? Why is she scared? Why is she not only scared? Why is she extremely terrified? Why are people of all shapes, sizes, ages, races out in the streets? What is this? Is this an apocalyptic? Is this a story about the apocalypse? Is there some kind of virus outbreak? What is going on? Now you're like, oh, more intrigued. Okay. So that's how descriptive language can change when you're telling a story. All right. So now, for the moment we've all been waiting for, I shall tell you a funny story. Without further ado, I'll tell you a funny story, and we'll end on that note. Now that you guys know how a story should sound, I'll tell you a story that is kind of recent, but a little bit embarrassing for me, but it's a good story. And it's really random, but it was something that I was thinking about recently. I was like, man, this would be a really good story for YouTube, but I don't know how to incorporate it. And then I was like, let me do a podcast about storytelling and tell this story. So when I was younger, I had an imaginary friend, or so we think. Dun dun dun. Maybe it was a ghost. I don't know. But I had an imaginary friend, and his name was Denny. Denny. All right. And Denny was literally my best friend, my BFF, my ride or die. Like, he was hanging out with me every day. Like, he was imaginary, so like nobody could see him, but I could see him. And I even remember slightly like what I thought he looked like. And even though now I'm an adult, I still kind of remember some features about him. He had like dirty blonde hair, and he was really tan, but like a farmer's kind of like tan. Like, it wasn't like he was tan because it was natural. It was like because he'd been out in the sun, and he had overalls on, and I don't know, like I remember some things about him, but he was my best friend, even though he wasn't real. He did not exist. He was imaginary, a figment of my imagination. And I wanted to kind of get over having an imaginary friend because I used to get made fun of a lot for it. I mean, obviously it's like kind of crazy to be talking to somebody in your room and somebody's not there, and then telling your friends about it. They're like, oh my God, Carly's really weird. Like, Carly's weird. So my brother, he was going to the military. He was about to leave to go to boot camp, and I decided that I needed to let Denny go with my brother to protect him. I was like 5 or 6 years old, you guys, maybe 7 at the most. I think I was like 5 or 6. And my brother was going off to the army, going to boot camp. And we drove, I think it was up to Virginia to drop him off. And I was like, you know what, Bubba? I call my brother Bubba, you guys. It's a Southern thing. My brother, his name is Kevin, but he's Bubba. I always call him Bubba. I don't care. That's his name to me. And I was like, Bubba, you know what? I'm going to let Denny stay with you because I want him to protect you, and have your back while you're at boot camp. Because, the whole way up there, my dad, who's also in the military, my dad was in the military for 30 years. My dad was just like telling my brother, basically, good luck. It's going to be hard. It's going to be tough. So I was listening to this and I'm like, okay, Denny, you have to protect Bubba. Like, you have to protect him. So I let Denny go with my brother. And after that, I mean, still to this day, I don't have any recollection of ever seeing Denny again. In my mind, I think that was the push that my mind needed to like end that relationship with an imaginary friend. But this is where the story gets really funny. So there was a night when my brother was in boot camp, basic training in the military, that there's like a group of like 20 or 30 people that are sleeping in the same room on their bunk beds, and somebody in the middle of the night starts flipping the switch up and down, up and down, up and down, the light switch, and the light's going on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off. And of course, people get in trouble, and everybody's like, who's doing that? Who's doing that? And it just so happens that my brother's bunk was the closest to the wall and the light switch. And my brother wasn't the one doing it though. My brother's like, I don't know who's doing it. Like, it's not me. And of course my brother gets pulled to the side. It's the military, so they're chewing him out. Chewing out just means like, really, really, really getting on and yelling at him. And my brother, he's also kind of a funny dude. So my brother was like, you know what? Maybe it was Denny. And the sergeant looked at my brother and he was like, Denny? Who are you talking about? Who's Denny? And my brother's like, with all seriousness, he's like, oh, it's my little sister's imaginary friend. And when I tell you, my brother got in so much trouble for saying that. Like, he told us that he had to go through hell and back because he got every punishment in the book for making that joke and saying like, it wasn't me, it was Denny, my little sister's imaginary friend. And I think in the end, it could have been anything, it could have been somebody else playing a prank. It could have been, even just the lights flickering being weird. I don't even know, but it was really funny because still to this day, that's been like 30 years ago now, almost 30 years, 28 years. And still to this day, that's something that at every family gathering or something, if something happens, something weird, like, hey, I thought I put this paper here, but now it's missing. Somebody makes a joke like, oh, Denny did it, or if we forget something, or if something weird happens, like the TV, the volume turns down or we can't hear. We're like, who turned the TV down? And then we're like, oh, Denny must have done it. It's like a little joke that we have. So yeah. As I told that story, I was really taken back to like my childhood, and it was fun. Like, my childhood was fun. I kind of low-key miss being a kid, and I'm sorry to my brother who got in trouble for Denny flipping the lights on and off, on and off. But yeah, so stories should flow naturally. Kind of like, I know my story might have been a little choppy because 30 years ago is a long time. I was remembering every detail I possibly could, but that's okay. That's normal. But again, my story had an introduction, a beginning. I gave you a little backstory about, hey, yeah, I had an imaginary friend. All right. And then the middle was like, oh, I sent my imaginary friend to boot camp with my brother to protect him. And then the climax was like, but there was some mischief going on. Turns out my brother got blamed for it, but then my brother tried to point the blame on this imaginary friend, Denny. And then the conclusion was, the sergeant didn't really like that. And so my brother got in a bunch of trouble. That was the conclusion. All right. So I hope you guys have a better understanding of how to tell a story. I mean, there's so many different forms of storytelling. I feel like I barely scratched the surface today. There's also like the art of telling fairy tales, recalling your past like I just did, telling something that happened yesterday. There's so many different types of storytelling, but so I hope you guys have a better understanding of at least how to shape your stories, and then also the vocabulary, the descriptive adjectives that you should use, and maybe even the transition words that you should use during the story as well. So if you did, please like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know if there's anything you would like me to talk about on this podcast. Like, literally, I use this for anything and everything. It doesn't have to actually deal with English, but I know since most of my viewers are ESL learners, that's kind of what I do. But yeah, let me know in the comments, and I hope to see you all in the next episode.